Hello there, my name's Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and an alternative life coach. I help people enjoy greater well-being by using simple tools such as meditation, mindfulness and dowsing. And if that sounds like the sort of thing that you might find interesting, click the thumbs up and subscribe. If you ever wondered where intuition might take you in life, here is part 2 of my conversation with award-winning filmmaker Bill Bennett on fear, love, and the magic of life.
We are surrounded by spiritual beings. It's changed my life fundamentally. Let's say we do have angels surrounding us all the time, and they're looking at us and they're watching us. They're not judging, but they're just there.
In the beginning of your book, your little dedication, I can see now why you have this written. What do you write? Is this journey I've been on has not been a solo journey. I've been guided by one angel in particular. That angel's name is Jennifer. And presumably that is a reference to your wife.
It is, yeah. We've last week we just celebrated the 40th anniversary of our first date together.
Oh, well done. And it's also lovely that you actually remember when your first date was. Fantastic. That aspect of sharing one's life with somebody else in a loving way, obviously it's not smooth all the way through, and with human emotion, etc. Friction inevitably is part of that, but there's still a deep love between a partnership and a friendship that such a partnership would be. Do you feel that a similar sort of love comes to you from the universe and from your intuitive aspect as well? Do you personify or feel that kind of impact in your life from elsewhere, not just from Jennifer?
That's a really, really good question. Now this might sound very, very strange, and I say it in all seriousness, but I find that I have a sudden kind of inexplicable waves of love and empathy that just comes out of nowhere for people. Just people. I see somebody on the street, and it comes down to insects as well. I mean, this might sound strange, when I'm walking, and I suddenly see an insect on the path in front of me, and I deliberately sort of change my footfall so that I don't squash that creature, because you talk on your YouTube channel, you talk about consciousness, and I believe consciousness pervades everything. And I haven't really talked about this with anybody before, but it's just crikey, I get annoyed with people. I get irritated, and I try not to get angry. But one of the things that I've done is I have taken the word hate out of my vocabulary totally. And I've also taken the word evil out of my vocabulary. People refer to Putin as being evil. I don't think he's evil. I obviously don't agree with what he's doing, but I don't think he's evil. And I don't hate anyone. I just now I cannot use that word hate. So yeah, it has had this sort of very strange effect where I just will have a sudden, I'll just be in the car waiting at the lights, and I'll watch a woman walking past with, wheeling a pram. And before I wouldn't have thought twice about it, or I would have been irritated. Why is she taking so long? It's a pedestrian crossing. She shouldn't be dawdling. But, then I think about how difficult it must be, for her. And then I think, does she have a partner, and is she doing this by herself, or, maybe the child has some sort of medical problem, or, and all these things, you think about these things. It's very strange. I never used to do that.
Mm. That's an opening of the heart, isn't it? It's the development of one's being in that kind of spiritual path, if there is such a thing as a spiritual path.
Mm.
Uh, when I emailed you, I wrote a couple of kind of things, some thoughts that I wanted to have your view on, really, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, as a human being, as a spiritual being in a human existence. Point of view is one of those things that, as a filmmaker, you have a specific set of answers to that label, point of view. Okay, so what's the character's point of view, what's the camera point of view, all of these things. In our life, point of view seems to be pretty integral to absolutely everything. Do you have any view on that sort of thinking?
Yeah, when I read that in your email, I thought, oh bloody hell, I hope he doesn't ask me that. I mean, it's hard. When you start off to tell a story, there are two major things that you've got to take into account. Two major decisions you've got to make. One is, what is the tone of the piece going to be? Now, people who don't sort of work in story, they maybe don't understand that, but the tone of the piece is fundamental to pretty much every other decision that you make. And whose point of view are you going to tell the story from? And then point of view impacts everything. There's the point of view of the, as you say, the camera. There's a point of view of the character. There's the point of view of the writer director, or the writer, and there's the point of view of the director, if they're two separate people. And then you take that then outside of story, and you look at point of view of the individual. Now, and this is where it becomes really interesting in a spiritual context, because I'm actually striving for a zero point of view. I'm striving for neutrality, because if I can find neutrality and take out my personal point of view from the equation, then I'm going to find peace. Because implicit in the concept of point of view is the notion of judgment. Now, people can talk about discernment as against judgment, but in the end, it's judgment, point of view. So judgment then comes down to status, and status comes down then to hierarchy, and stations in life. And because if we judge from a higher moral ground.
Right.
But the one thing that I learned from Paul's work, studying Paul's work, and I guess making the film that I made and working on this next one on fear, is that we're all sparks of the divine, and there's no greater spark or there's no lesser spark. We're all sparks. And so and those sparks are from the God force, so we are part of the God force. And despite what the Catholic Church might say, I firmly believe that God doesn't judge, and that God is just pure love, and pure love doesn't judge. We see that in pets. If I can bring it back to something as common as that, a dog, a pet doesn't judge us, and that's why we love pets so much. So coming back to this point of neutrality, if we can find that point, that kind of zero-sum point of neutrality in our life, then I think that's where true happiness lies. Because point of view and judgment will only lead to, at some point, acrimony. You see this at dinner parties all the time. Somebody has a point of view, and they shout down the other person's point of view. And you see it on social media all the time. I mean, I don't know why people post stuff on social media about their political views, because they're not going to change anyone else. You think that by putting something on, I hate Trump, that's going to make somebody who's a Trump lover hate Trump. That's not going to happen. that Trump lover is only going to hate you. So I've met a couple of people in the work that I've been doing recently who I think sit in true neutrality, and I aspire to that. I really aspire to that. And so what that means is obviating the point of view. That's a long way of answering your question, but I hope that's...
No, that's a brilliant answer. No, I kind of half apologize for asking the question in the first place, but thank you, it's a brilliant answer. I won't ask you the other aspects. Maybe one day you'll come back again when you have time, and we'll talk some more. But I want you to tell us about your current movie, the one that you're working on, which is the Fear movie. Tell us about that. What's that all about? Well, clearly, I was going to say, what's that all about? I mean,
when I was making the intuition film, I began to realize that the biggest blockage to intuition was fear. And then I started to think about that more deeply. And I thought, just in the same way that I thought I knew what intuition was, but when I really dug down deep, I didn't know what intuition was. Same thing with fear. I thought I knew what fear was, but really when I didn't know what fear was. I mean, fear is such it's such an integral part, tragically, of our day, of each of us. We're so enmeshed in fear constantly, a lot of us. So that was really the start of it. And so what I decided to do, Tim, was to make the film in the same style that I'd made PGS, the intuition film, exactly the same style. And then I decided that I would do 3 films. So intuition would be the first, fear will be the second, and the third one I want to do on hope.
yeah.
So I want to explore hope and have that as a trilogy, that people can refer to. I think that would be a nice sort of way to wrap it up. But getting back to fear, I decided once again that I would do it intuitively. It led me into some extraordinary people. This film has got Dr. Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Carolyn Mace again, a wonderful fellow called Dr. Richard Schwartz, who is a clinical psychologist out of Harvard. And so I've got a mixture of scientists, top people in neuroscience, mystics. I've got a lieutenant colonel in the US Rangers who became a very successful mercenary and flew all around the world fighting other people's battles. And he talks about fear from, combat terms. And I've, because really what drives me in making these films is not any kind of noble act. It's really curiosity, personal curiosity. Yeah. Franklin D. Roosevelt famously said, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. And what I've discovered in making this film is that, in fact, that's not true. You don't need to fear fear. In fact, if you can befriend fear and bring fear into your life, and that's why the film is called Facing Fear, then, you'll be able to live your life then without this constant stress of anxiety. But, I'll tell you something, Tim. One thing really occurred to me. You hear these people about, now with DNA and cold case and stuff like that. And 25 years after the fact, this pedophile is discovered or this murderer is discovered or something like that. So then I thought about that and I thought, well, for those 25 years, that person must have been living in absolute terror. That any day there's going to be a phone call or an email or a knock on the door saying but your life is now going to be spent, the rest of your life is going to be spent in jail. And so that made me think, well, okay, well, so that's fear. That person's living in fear. And how do you get around that? You get around that by being a good person. Now, it's as simple as that. If you're a good person, you're going to rid yourself of a lot of fear. If you pay your taxes, if you pay your bills, you know, if you treat people with kindness, then more times than not, you're going to get kindness in return. If you treat people horribly, then, you know, you're going to live in fear that you're going to get some sort of horrible retribution come back at you. You know, so if you can try and I'm really kind of simplifying this now, you know, but if you can try and live your life as best you can without harming anybody, and without doing ill, then you're probably going to get rid of a lot of fear.
Yeah.
You know, it really is as simple as that.
Absolutely, and of course that ties in really neatly with the concept of well, you've written a trilogy of books for young adults.
Palace of Fires.
Palace of Fires, thank you. Yeah, I had it here on my notes, which they're fictional, but it's about modern day witchcraft, and the main tenet of witchcraft is do to others as you would have done to yourself. I mean, that whole thing of don't do anything that you wouldn't want done to yourself. It's that basic thing, because what you give out comes right back. So, you know, and that's a really interesting way that you just described that same kind of feeling, associating that aspect with fear. And quite frankly, this existence as humanity, you know, we live in basically that. It's either love or fear that we're kind of echoing off all the time, isn't it? Really, fundamentally. And what the change that we're all going through globally at the moment, it seems, is to actually start to come to terms with fear and say, and in our own ways, individually and collectively, say, we've probably had enough of that. So well, let's change.
Cinema's great filmmaker Jean-Luc Godard, whom, you know, was one of the leaders of the French New Wave, famously once said, all you need to make a movie is a girl and a gun. And that pretty much sums it up. And he made Breathless, which is one of the great crime movies of all time. Okay, I want you to consider this, because we have an entire chapter in the Facing Fear movie on love. We call it Love versus Fear. And there are some very, very kind of divergent conversations about this in this particular chapter. But one of the things that came from it is this, the notion that there's not love or fear, there's love and fear, and they're all part of the one thing. And if you say that let's say that there is a continuum of emotion between, you've got say a length of rope, and there's a knot on one end, knot on the other end, and love is on one end and is in the knot, and fear is on the other. But there's this rope between, and you've got a little slider, you know. So it's kind of like, I liken it to, where does the East stop and the West begin?
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. So if you look at fear and love as being part of the one thing, that you can't really understand fear until you really fully understand love, and vice versa, and then it becomes something really, really, really quite interesting. It's not as simple as love versus fear. It is a much more complex equation than that. And there is this slider, you know. I mean, you can love somebody, but you can also be fearful of them as well. You know, it's they're inextricably linked, and that's what I find really quite fascinating in this examination of fear, that it's not as simple as people think. You know, it's much more complex.
Yeah, thank you. We're going to leave it there. It's
Tim, listen. Okay, Paul Selig is down the list now. You know, I'm in terms of your memory recall, not necessarily in terms of, you know, quality of content, but in terms of memory recall, you got to admit.